The mountain man buys a wild foal out of pity. The secret it was hiding changed everything. He thought it was just a half-starved creature, broken and worthless, bought for a single silver dollar. But when he leads it into his lonely cabin, the night delivers a stranger, a desperate girl with a knife in her hand. She claims the wild foal carries more than scars. It carries a secret that could tear the valley apart. Now the old cabin is no longer silent. Hired guns ride under the railroad's flag. Whispers spread in town, and in the foal's tangled mane lies proof of a promise powerful men will kill to destroy. Hooves thunder, a door slams, a child screams in the dark. What hidden truth could turn pity into peril? And will a solitary mountain man risk everything to protect it? Tell me in the comments where you're watching from right now, and if this story speaks to you, make sure you hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across Silver Bluff's dusty main street as William Hawley made his way through the crowd. The auction had drawn folk from all around, ranch hands with weathered faces, railroad men in oil-stained clothes, and merchants seeking bargains. William kept to himself, his worn boots scuffing the packed earth as he moved between the gathered bodies. The auctioneer's voice rang out sharp and clear over the corral. Next up, we've got tools from the Henderson place. Shovels, picks, ain't they fine? His rapid-fire calls, mixed with the jingle of harness brass and the snorts of penned horses. William hadn't planned to stay long. His monthly trip to town was for supplies, nothing more. But something made him linger as the sun sank lower, painting the mountains purple against the sky. The crowd grew more boisterous as whiskey passed between them. Coarse laughter and rough talk filled the air. William's hand brushed the worn Bible in his coat pocket, a habit from darker days when its presence steadied him. And what do we have here? The auctioneer's voice turned mocking. Looks like we got ourselves a sorry excuse for a horse. Two ranch hands dragged forward a pitiful sight, a foal so thin its ribs showed like barrel staves through its dull coat. Its legs trembled as it fought against the rope, eyes rolling white with fear. The crowd's reaction was immediate and cruel. "Ain't worth the bullet to put it down," someone shouted. Others laughed. A group of boys scooped up pebbles from the dirt, pelting the frightened animal. The foal's owner, red-faced and swaying, raised a braided whip. "Stand still, you worthless nag." Something snapped inside William's chest, a feeling he hadn't known in years. Before he could think, his boots carried him forward, shoulder parting the press of bodies. "Hold on there," he said, voice rough from disuse. The owner turned, whip still raised. "What's it to you, mountain man?" William reached into his pocket, past the Bible to where a single silver dollar lay. It was meant for lamp oil, but some things mattered more. He held up the coin, letting it catch the light. "I'm buying that foal." Laughter rippled through the crowd. "Old Hale's gone soft in the head," someone called. "Trading good silver for crowbait." The owner's bloodshot eyes fixed on the dollar. "Your funeral," he spat, snatching the coin. He shoved the lead rope into William's hand and staggered away. William approached the trembling foal slowly, keeping his movements gentle. "Easy there," he murmured. The animal's fear was a living thing, born of hunger and cruel handling. It reminded him of someone from long ago. He pushed the memory away. His old mare stood patient at the hitching post. William secured the foal's lead rope to his saddle horn, speaking soft nonsense words as he worked. The crowd dispersed, entertainment over, leaving him alone in the gathering dusk. The ride home was slow. The foal stumbled on weak legs, fighting the rope until exhaustion set in. William kept his mare to a walk, glancing back often. The mountain air grew sharp with night's approach, and coyotes called from distant ridges. His cabin appeared as a dark shape against the stars, smoke still rising faint from the morning's fire. William's thoughts turned to the empty lamp, the dollar spent. "Reckon we'll make do with firelight," he told his Mara as he dismounted. The barn was rough but sound, sweet with old hay. William led the foal inside, his lantern casting dancing shadows on the log walls. The animal stood trembling, sides heaving, as he spread fresh straw. "You're safe now," William whispered, surprising himself with the gentleness in his voice. He hung the lantern on its peg and stepped back, watching the foal's ears flicker at his words. Something stirred in his chest, an ache he'd tried to forget. He bought the foal out of pity, yes, but there was more. In its frightened eyes he saw a chance to protect something fragile, to make one small piece of the world right. The lantern flame wavered, throwing golden light across the straw. William stood a moment longer, then turned toward his dark cabin. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges. For now, it was enough that one lonely creature had found shelter. William woke to the first hint of dawn creeping over the mountain peaks. The cabin's chill air nipped at his face as he pulled on his warm boots and shrugged into his wool coat. His morning routine never varied. Check the animals before anything else. The barn door creaked on its leather hinges as he stepped inside. His old Mar nickered a greeting, but his attention fixed on the foal. The small creature had settled somewhat, though wariness still showed in its dark eyes. In the gray morning light filtering through the barn slats, William could see just how poor its condition was. "Time we got you cleaned up proper," he murmured, reaching for the curry brush hanging on its peg. The foal shied away at first, but William's patience won out. Speaking in low, gentle tones, he began working the brush through its tangled mane. His fingers caught on something hard woven into the hair. Frowning, William leaned closer, parting the coarse strands. There, tightly braided into the mane, was a small leather tube, no longer than his finger. The discovery made him pause. Who would hide something in a half-starved foal's mane? As he worked to free the tube, his eye caught something else, a mark on the foal's flank. Not the usual ranch brand he was familiar with, but something different. The pattern seemed tribal, though faint and half-healed. William had seen enough native markings during his scouting days to recognize their style, but this one was unfamiliar. His pocket knife, he carefully cut the tube free. It was sealed at both ends with dark wax. The mystery of it felt heavy in his hand. The morning chores wouldn't wait for solving puzzles. He slipped the tube into his coat pocket and finished tending to the animals. The morning passed in familiar work. William split wood until his pile grew substantial, the sharp crack of his axe echoing off the ridge. The physical labor helped quiet his mind, though his thoughts kept returning to the tube weighing in his pocket. By midday, he had a pot of beans simmering over the cook fire, their rich smell mixing with wood smoke as shadows lengthened across his cabin yard. William sat at his rough-hewn table with his supper bowl. The sealed tube sat before him, demanding attention. Something about it made him uneasy, as if breaking the seal would change things he'd rather leave unchanged. Finally, he picked up the tube. Using the point of his knife, he carefully pried away the wax. Inside was a rolled piece of parchment, worn but still intact. William smoothed it flat on the table, squinting in the lamplight at the careful script written in two languages, English and Spanish, side by side. His eyes widened as he read. It was a deed, properly drawn up and signed, granting rights to a valley several miles upriver. William knew the place, a fertile stretch of land where the river widened, good water, and better grazing. The sort of land men fought over. Outside, coyotes began their evening chorus, their yips and howls carrying across the darkening valley. From the barn came an answering whinny, the foal, nervous at the wild sounds. William stood and moved to the window, deed in hand. The night pressed black against the glass, and his reflection stared back at him. Troubled. Questions crowded his mind. How did such an important document end up hidden in a starved foal's mane? Whose hand had braided it there, and why? The tribal brand suggested a story. He wasn't sure he wanted to know. William returned to the table and opened his old Bible. The leather cover was smooth with years of handling, its pages marked with pressed flowers his wife had gathered before. The fever took her and their daughter. Carefully, he tucked the deed between its pages. Whatever the paper's story, it seemed safer there than anywhere else. The lamp flame wavered, making shadows dance on the cabin walls. From the barn came another nervous whinny. William sat in his chair, listening to the night sounds, the coyotes, the wind in the pines, the creak of his cabin settling. His peaceful solitude suddenly felt less certain, as if the sealed tube had carried trouble to his door. The night wrapped William's cabin in darkness, broken only by the faint glow of his banked fire. He had just settled into his chair, Bible in hand, when a clatter from the barn jolted him fully awake. His old Mara's worried whinny followed then. The foal's higher-pitched response. William moved swiftly, years of mountain living having taught him the difference between normal night sounds and trouble. He grabbed his rifle from its pegs and lit the lantern with practiced hands. The flame caught, throwing yellow light across the cabin's worn floorboards. The cool night air hit his face as he stepped outside. Another soft noise came from the barn, the scrape of boots on wooden planks. William approached carefully, lantern held low. The barn door stood slightly ajar, though he distinctly remembered latching it. Pushing the door wider with his rifle barrel, William raised the lantern. Light spilled across the straw-covered floor, catching movement near the foal stall. There, crouched like a cornered cat, was a young girl. The blade in her hand caught the lantern light and threw it back in a sharp gleam. She couldn't have been more than 13 years old, but her eyes held the wariness of someone far older. Her black hair hung in 2 long braids, and her clothes, a mix of Apache and Mexican styling, were dusty from hard travel. Despite her obvious exhaustion, she held the knife steady. "That's far enough," she said in clear English, though her accent carried traces of Spanish. "Give back what you took." William kept his rifle pointed at the ground, but ready. "Reckon you better explain yourself, girl." "I am Marisol." She lifted her chin proudly. "The foal was given to me by my grandfather. The papers hidden in its mane belong to my family, to my people." The pieces clicked together in William's mind. The tribal brand, the deed written in 2 languages. "Your grandfather hid that deed?" "Before he died." Her voice caught slightly, but her eyes remained fierce. "He said the papers would save our people, prove our right to the valley. I followed the foal's tracks here. Give them back." William studied her face in the lantern light. There was fear there, beneath the defiance, and something else, bone deep. Weariness. His finger rested near his rifle's trigger, but he couldn't bring himself to aim at a child. No matter how sharp her knife might be, slowly, deliberately, he lowered his rifle until its stock touched the barn floor. "I don't aim to hurt you, girl, or keep what ain't mine." Marisol watched him, knife still raised, uncertainty flickering across her face. The foal whickered softly and stretched its neck toward her. William saw her expression soften for just a moment as she reached out to touch its nose. "Lower that knife," William said quietly, "and we can talk proper. You look half-starved. When's the last time you ate?" The question seemed to remind her body of its hunger. Her free hand pressed against her stomach, and her shoulders sagged slightly. After a long moment, she lowered the knife. "2 days ago," she admitted. "I had to keep following the tracks before they disappeared." William nodded toward the cabin. "Got beans warming on the fire, and fresh bread from yesterday's baking." Marisol hesitated, glancing between William and the foal. The animal seemed to know her, straining against its lead rope to get closer. That, more than anything, convinced William she was telling the truth about her connection to it. "The foal will be here come morning," he said. "You have my word on that." Finally, she slipped the knife into her belt and stood. William noted how she tried to hide her exhaustion, keeping her back straight despite trembling legs. He led the way back to the cabin, aware of her following several paces behind. Inside, William ladled a generous portion of beans into a bowl and cut thick slices of bread. Marisol ate quickly but neatly, some of her wariness easing as warm food filled her stomach. Neither spoke until she had finished 2 helpings. While she ate, William fetched a clean blanket from his trunk. He spread it near the fire, far enough from his own bed to give them both space, close enough to the warmth to keep off the mountain night's chill. The foal's occasional stamps and snorts drifted through the cabin walls as Marisol settled onto the blanket. Her hand stayed near her knife, but her eyes were growing heavy. William returned to his chair, aware that his quiet life had just become considerably more complicated. The cabin, which had known only silence for so long, now held the soft breathing of 2 people instead of 1. Between them lay a fragile truce, as delicate as the paper deed hidden in William's Bible. Outside, an owl called into the darkness, and the mountain night continued its ancient rhythms, unaware that everything had changed. Dawn crept over the mountain peaks, painting William's cabin in soft golden light. He'd been up since before first light, stoking the fire and setting coffee to boil. Marisol still slept on her blanket, one hand curled protectively around the knife at her belt. William cleared his throat loudly. "Sun's up. Time to earn your keep." Marisol's eyes snapped open, alert despite her exhaustion. "I told you, I'm leaving. Today with my foal and the papers." "Reckon you'll need breakfast first." William set a plate of cornbread and beans before her. "And there's work needs doing before anyone goes anywhere." She sat up, pride straightening her spine. "I don't need charity. Ain't charity. It's fair trade, work for food and shelter." He gestured toward the window where morning frost still glittered. Mountain weather ain't kind to unprepared travelers. Marisol ate quickly, her movements precise despite her obvious hunger. When she finished, William led her outside to the woodpile. He demonstrated how to split kindling, showing her the proper angle to hold the hatchet. "Keep your thumb tucked," he instructed, watching her first awkward attempts. The hatchet bounced off the wood more often than not, but she refused to give up. Her small hands gripped the handle tighter, determination setting her jaw. After she'd managed a decent pile of kindling, William showed her the path to the creek. He handed her 2 buckets, their metal surfaces dented from years of use. "Watch for loose rocks. Current strong this time of year." Marisol struggled with the full buckets on the return trip, water sloshing over her boots. Still, she didn't complain, though her arms trembled with the effort. William pretended not to notice when she stopped to rest, preserving her dignity. The barn door needed mending next. Its hinges had worked loose over the winter. William demonstrated how to hold the nails steady while hammering, then stepped back to let her try. The foal watched from its stall, nickering softly whenever Marisol glanced its way. "You're good with that animal," William observed as they worked. "Known it long?" "Since it was born." Marisol's voice softened. "My grandfather helped birth it during the last moon of his life. He said it was special, that it would help save our people." The sun climbed higher as they finished the door. William prepared a simple supper of salt pork and potatoes, watching as Marisol moved to the barn to check on the foal. Through the open door, he heard her humming, a gentle Spanish lullaby that floated on the evening air. The foal pressed against her, seeking attention while she stroked its tangled mane. Over supper, William finally asked the question that had been weighing on his mind. "Tell me about this parchment your grandfather hid." Marisol set down her fork, her expression growing serious. It is a deed to the valley where my mother's people lived for generations. The railroad men say we have no right to it, but the paper proves otherwise. My grandfather knew they would try to take it, so he hid it where they wouldn't look. In a foal's mane, William mused, still skeptical of the tale. Yet there was no denying the sincerity in her voice, the way her eyes flashed with conviction. The valley has water year-round, she continued. Good grazing land. The railroad wants it for their cattle runs. They already forced other families to leave. Her hands clenched in her lap. But we have proof of our claim. The paper is written in English and Spanish both. They cannot pretend not to understand. After supper, they sat outside the barn while the foal grazed nearby. The young animal eventually wandered over and laid its head in Marisol's lap, eyes half closed in contentment. The sight stirred something in William's chest, a sharp ache of remembrance. His daughter used to sit just so with their old dog, singing softly in the evening. Light. The memory brought both pain and a strange comfort. He hadn't thought of Sarah in months, had pushed away all recollection of her sweet smile and gentle ways. Now, watching Marisol with the foal, those memories rose umbiddn. As darkness settled over the mountain, they returned to the cabin. William added wood to the fire while Marisol arranged her blanket. The familiar crackle of burning pine filled the silence between them. Settling into his chair, William bowed his head in his nightly ritual. Lord, he whispered, grant me wisdom. Show me the right path. He glanced at Marisol, already drifting to sleep, her face young and vulnerable in the firelight. Help me know what to do. The cabin grew quiet except for the pop of burning wood and their steady breathing. Outside, a whippoorwill called into the gathering night, its song echoing across the silent mountains. The morning sun beat down as William worked the fence line, his weathered hands pulling wire taut between posts. Sweat darkened his shirt. Despite the mountain chill that lingered in the air, the old fence had taken damage during winter storms, and mending it was slow work. Hoofbeats echoed up the trail. William straightened, shading his eyes against the glare. Sheriff Tom Carver rode toward him, morning light glinting off his badge. The lawman's bay horse picked its way carefully over the rocky ground. Morning, Holly, Carver called out, reining to a stop. His smile seemed friendly enough, but something cold lurked in his eyes. Quite a piece from town up here. William nodded, once keeping his expression neutral. Sheriff, saw you at the auction other day. Carver shifted in his saddle, thumbs hooked in his belt. Bought yourself that scrawny foal, didn't you? Paid fair for it, William said, coiling excess wire around his arm. Funny thing about that foal. The sheriff's voice hardened slightly. Some railroad men been asking after it. Say it was stolen property. William's hand stilled. That so? Auctioneer seemed right pleased to take my silver dollar for it. Railroads offering a reward now. Carver leaned forward, his saddle creaking. Way I hear it, that foal belongs to them. They're mighty interested in getting it back. Can't help you there? William turned back to his fence work. What I bought square. A twig snapped near the cabin. William glimpsed Marisol ducking behind the corner, her face pale as she listened. The sheriff's smile thinned. Listen here, Holly. I'm trying to do you a kindness. Railroad men, they got long memories. They don't take kind to folks keeping what ain't theirs. That foal's mine, William said firmly. Bought and paid for in front of half the town. Carver straightened in his saddle, all pretense of friendliness gone. Careful who you shelter, Holly. The railroad don't forgive thieves. He gathered his reins, turning his horse. Be a shame if trouble found its way up here to your quiet mountain. William watched silently as the sheriff rode away, dust rising behind his horse's hooves. Only when Carver disappeared around the bend did he set down his tools and head toward the cabin. Marisol met him at the door, her eyes wide with fear. They will come for the Foal, she whispered. For the papers. No one's coming for either, William said, though unease churned in his gut. He looked down at her trembling hands. You're safe here. She shook her head. The railroad men, they burned our homes when we wouldn't leave. They will not stop. William considered her words, remembering other times he'd seen the railroad push people from their land. The sound of running water caught his attention. Come on, he said gruffly. Time you learned something useful. He led her to the creek that ran behind his cabin, its clear waters dancing over rocks. From a shelf in his tool shed, he retrieved 2 fishing lines wound on wooden spools. Fishing's good medicine for worried minds, he said, showing her how. To tie a hook to the line requires patience, attention, keeps your thoughts from running wild. Marisol watched intently as he demonstrated how to bait the hook and cast the line. Her first attempt sent the bait flying in wrong directions, but she persisted, her tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. There, William said, as she managed a clean cast. Now we wait. They sat in comfortable silence, watching their lines drift in the current. The sun warmed their shoulders while birds called from the trees above. After a while, Marisol's line jerked. Easy now, William coached as she struggled with the fish. Don't pull too hard. Let it tire itself out. Her face lit up with triumph when she finally landed a small trout, its scales flashing silver in the sunlight. I did it. That you did. William showed her how to clean the fish, explaining each step. This is your supper tonight, earned by your own hand. Despite the small victory, tension lingered in the air like storm clouds on the horizon. William knew the sheriff's visit was only the beginning. Men would come again, and they wouldn't be so polite next time. He watched Marisol carefully wrap her fish in leaves, her movements precise and proud, despite her obvious worry. The morning's warning echoed in his mind. The railroad don't forgive thieves. He'd lived long enough to know the truth of those words. Yet watching Marisol's small hands work, seeing the trust she'd placed in him, he knew he couldn't turn her away. Whatever trouble came, they would face it together. William guided his mare down the winding trail toward Silver Bluff, empty saddlebags thumping against her flanks. The morning air carried a hint of autumn, though summer's heat still baked the valley below. He needed flour and nail-simple supplies that couldn't wait, no matter the risk. The town appeared sleepy at first glance. A few wagons creaked along. Main Street and washing fluttered on lines behind the houses. William dismounted at the hitching rail outside the mercantile, his boots raising small puffs of dust. As he tied his mare, voices drifted from the nearby water trough. That's Hale's horse, a man muttered. The one harboring that half-breed thief up in his cabin. William's hands stilled on the reins. He kept his face turned away, listening. I heard she stole something valuable, another voice added. Railroad's mighty interested in finding her. Holly. Always was a strange one, the first man sneered. Living up there alone like a hermit. Now taking in strays? William straightened his shoulders and walked into the mercantile, letting the screen door bang shut behind him. The familiar smell of coffee, leather, and dry goods filled the air. Old Joe Peterson stood behind the counter, weighing sugar for Mrs. Miller. Morning, William said when Mrs. Miller had gone. He set his list on the counter. Need some supplies. Joe glanced at the paper, then looked around to make sure they were alone. William, he said quietly, you've always been a good customer. Fair man. So let me speak plain. There's talk going round about you and that girl. Just need flour and nails, Joe. William kept his voice level. Railroad men been asking questions. Joe began gathering William's supplies, his movements nervous, showing lots of interest in your whereabouts. Even offered rewards for information. That so? William counted out coins onto the counter. "Be careful, William." Joe leaned closer. "They ain't the forgiving sort. Whatever trouble you're in." "No trouble here," William cut him off. "Just a man buying supplies." He packed the goods into his saddlebags quickly, keen to be gone. But as he stepped onto the boardwalk, voices drew his attention to the sheriff's office across the street. 3 railroad riders sat their horses in a cluster around Sheriff Carver. One pointed toward the hills, toward William's cabin. The sheriff nodded, writing something in a small notebook. William's chest tightened. He mounted smoothly and turned, his Mari toward home, forcing himself not to rush. Only when the town disappeared behind him did he urge her into a fast trot. The sun was lowering by the time he reached his cabin. He heard Marisol's voice before he saw her, singing softly in Spanish. The melody drifted from the corral where she stood with the foal, one hand extended with a handful of grass, while the other held a rope halter. "Así pecuego," she murmured as the foal stretched its neck toward her offering. "Gentle now." William dismounted quietly, not wanting to break the moment. The foal's ears flicked forward and back, but it didn't startle. Marisol slipped the halter over its nose with practiced ease, still singing. The simple tune sparked a memory of his own daughter singing as she did her chores, and his throat tightened. "You have a way with him," William said when she finished. Marisol smiled, pride brightening her face. "My grandfather taught me. He said patience and song calm wild spirits better than force." William unloaded the supplies, debating whether to tell her what he'd heard in town. But looking at her gentle handling of the foal, he couldn't bring himself to break this moment of peace. Instead, he built up the fire and mixed cornbread. While she finished with the foal, they ate in comfortable silence as darkness gathered outside. The cornbread was warm, crumbling between their fingers. Crickets chirped in the yard, and somewhere an owl called. "Thank you," Marisol said suddenly, her voice soft, "for letting me stay, for helping us." William studied her across the firelight. This brave, frightened child who carried such a heavy burden. The urge to protect her warred with his fear of what was coming. He'd lived long enough to know that powerful men rarely let go of what they wanted. "You're welcome here," he said gruffly, meaning it despite his worry. Outside, a coyote wailed. In the distance, William added another log to the fire, watching sparks spiral up toward the darkening sky. He would need to be more vigilant now. The railroad men wouldn't stay in town forever. Sunday morning painted the mountains in soft gold. William stood before his clouded mirror, trying to tame his beard with an old comb. He hadn't been to church in months, preferring solitude to judgment. But something pushed him to go today, not for himself, but for Marisol. "You sure about this?" He called to the closed bedroom door, where Marisol was changing into her best dress, a faded blue cotton thing she'd pulled from her small bundle. "Yes," came her firm reply. "My grandfather said faith gives strength." William adjusted his collar, the starched fabric uncomfortable against his weathered neck. His Sunday suit hung loose now. Mountain living had worn away the softness of town life. When Marisol emerged, she had braided her dark hair and wrapped herself in a worn shawl embroidered with desert flowers. They rode double on William's Mari. Marisol perched behind him. The foal stayed safely in the barn, growing stronger each day on good feed and gentle care. As they approached Silver Bluff, the church bell tolled across the valley, calling the faithful to worship. William felt Marisol stiffen as they passed the first houses. Townsfolk walked toward the white-painted church, dressed in their Sunday best, heads turned to watch them pass. William kept his eyes forward, his back straight. They dismounted at the hitching post. Marisol clutched her shawl tighter, but lifted her chin. William placed a steadying hand on her shoulder as they climbed the wooden steps. Preacher Amos Wells stood at the door, greeting his flock. His kind eyes crinkled at the corners when he saw them. "William Hawley, it's been too long." He turned to Marisol with a gentle smile. "And who might this young lady be?" "Marisol," she answered softly, dropping a small curtsy. "Welcome, Marisol." The preacher held out a worn hymn book. "We're glad to have you join us today." Inside, the church smelled of pine boards and lemon polish. Sunlight streamed through plain glass windows, catching dust motes in golden beams. William guided Marisol to a back pew, aware of the whispers and stares that Mrs. Peterson, the mercantile owner's wife, twisted around to gawk. Her husband Joe gave William a worried frown. But old widow Carson, who lived at the edge of town, offered Marisol a warm nod. The organ wheezed to life, and Preacher Wells called them to worship. When the first hymn began, Marisol held the book carefully, following the words with her finger. Her voice started as a whisper, trembling like a butterfly's wing. But as the verses continued, she grew more confident. William hadn't sung in years, not since his family's passing. But hearing Marisol's clear voice beside him, something loosened in his chest. By the final verse, his own rough baritone joined hers. The preacher's sermon spoke of welcome and mercy. He read from Matthew about caring for strangers, his eyes sweeping the congregation meaningfully. William noticed some shoulders soften, some faces grow thoughtful. After the final hymn, people filed out into the sunshine. A few muttered behind their hands, casting dark looks. But others surprised William. Miss Sarah, the schoolteacher, stopped to compliment Marisol's singing. Tommy Tucker's mother offered them fresh-baked bread. "You have a lovely voice," Preacher Wells told Marisol as they prepared to leave. "I hope we'll hear it again next Sunday." On the ride home, Marisol sat straighter behind William. She hummed hymn tunes under her breath, her fingers tapping gently against his coat. The morning's anxiety had melted into something lighter. Back at the cabin, William checked the foal while Marisol heated leftover stew. The young horse nickered. A greeting, its coat beginning to shine with proper care. Its legs, once spindly with hunger, showed promising strength. They ate at the rough table, sunshine warming the wooden walls. The stew tasted better than usual somehow. Or maybe it was just a lingering piece of the morning settling into William's bones. "Thank you," Marisol said suddenly, stirring her bowl, "for taking me today, for everything." William cleared his throat, unused to gratitude. "Well now," he said gruffly, "reckon we both needed it." He bowed his head slightly. "Lord, we thank you for these mercies, small and large. For food and shelter, for friendly faces, for hope when it's most needed. Amen." When he looked up, Marisol was beaming, her smile bright as mountain sunshine. The foal dozed in its stall, and afternoon light pooled golden on the wooden floor. For just a moment, William let himself believe that acceptance was possible, that hearts could indeed soften Dot, but beyond the warm circle of their peace. In the gathering dusk, riders gathered in the shadows of pine trees. They spoke in low voices, heads bent together as they planned. Their horses stamped restlessly, steam rising from their flanks in the cool evening air. The night wind keened through the pines, bitter and sharp. William sat at his rough table, reading his Bible by lamplight, while Marisol curled near the hearth, humming hymns to the sleeping foal. Peace wrapped around them like a warm blanket. The first crack of splintering wood shattered everything. The door burst open, letting in a blast of frigid air and dark shapes. William leaped up, reaching for his rifle, but a fist caught him in the jaw. He stumbled back as railroad men poured into the cabin. Their faces were wrapped in bandanas, but their eyes gleamed with cruel purpose. "No!" Marisol screamed as two men seized her arms. She kicked and thrashed, but they lifted her off her feet. William fought through the pain, throwing punches. His fist connected with someone's nose, drawing blood. But there were too many. A boot caught him in the ribs, driving the air from his lungs. Another blow sent him crashing into the table. "The papers," a gruff voice demanded. "Where are they?" Through blurring vision, William saw them tearing through his cabin. They ripped open his mattress, scattered his books, ransacked every drawer. One found the Bible and shook out the hidden parchment. With a grunt of satisfaction, from the barn came the sound of breaking boards and the foal's terrified whinny. William tried to rise, but boots kept him down, grinding his face into the floorboards, now slick with his own blood. "Got the horse," someone called. "Wild things fighting, but we'll break it soon enough." Marisol's screams turned to desperate. Apache words, prayers, or curses. They dragged her toward the door. William reached out, fingers grasping empty air. "Leave her be," he croaked. "She's just a child." A boot caught him in the temple. Stars exploded behind his eyes as cruel laughter filled the cabin. They were dragging him, too, out into the biting cold. Snow crushed against his face as they threw him down the steps. Through the haze of pain, he heard hoofbeats. Marisol's cries grew fainter. The foal's frightened calls echoed off the ridges. Then silence fell, broken only by the wind's mocking. Hal. William lay in the snow, each breath stabbing his ribs. Time blurred. The cold seeped into his bones, but he couldn't move. Above him, stars wheeled across the black sky, indifferent to human suffering. Dawn came slowly, painting the snow pink. William finally forced himself to his knees, every movement agony. His face was crusted with frozen blood. Inside the cabin, devastation greeted him. Broken furniture, scattered belongings, torn books, his peaceful home destroyed in minutes. The barn gaped open, splintered boards testament to violence. His old Mars idled in her stall, trembling, but the foal's stall stood empty, straw scattered, and trampled. William sank to his knees in the wreckage. For the first time since burying his wife and daughter, tears carved hot trails down his frozen cheeks. His shoulders shook as grief overwhelmed him. "Lord," he whispered, voice breaking, "I failed them. Failed to protect another child. Give me strength. Please, give me strength to make this right." He stayed there, praying through his tears until the sun climbed higher. Then, slowly, he gathered himself. Every movement brought fresh pain, but he forced himself to move. He cleaned his wounds at the wash basin, wincing at his reflection in the clouded mirror. His face was a mass of bruises, one eye swollen nearly shut. His ribs screamed when he breathed, but he was alive. And while he lived, he could act. William pulled on his warmest coat, checked his rifle, and filled his saddlebags with ammunition. He strapped on his knife and filled his canteen. The cabin felt colder than ever as he took one last look around. The broken door swung in the wind. Torn pages from his Bible fluttered on the floor. The silence pressed against him like a physical thing, heavy with loss and memory. But this time would be different. This time, he wouldn't let grief paralyze him. This time, he would fight back. He saddled his Mare, who still trembled from the night's violence. "Easy, girl," he murmured, stroking her neck. "We've got work to do." His body protested as he swung into the saddle, but determination burned stronger than pain. Somewhere out there, Marisol needed him. The foal she loved had been stolen. The papers that could save her people's land were in the wrong hands. William took one last look at his ruined homestead. Then he turned his Mare's head toward town, toward the railroad men who had shattered his peace, toward Marisol. "Lord, give me strength," he whispered again. Then he touched his heels to the Mare's flanks and rode out, leaving the lonely cabin behind. William guided his Mare higher into the ridges, following hoofprints in patches of melting snow. His bruised body ached with each step the horse took. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows through the pines, making tracking harder by the minute. he studied the ground carefully. 5 horses had passed this way, their prints cutting deep in the muddy earth. One set belonged to the foal, its smaller hooves dragging as if the animal fought every step. His jaw tightened at the thought of its fear. The mare stumbled on loose. Shale and William winced as pain shot through his ribs. He had pushed too hard, trying to make up ground. Now darkness approached, and exhaustion weighed on him like a heavy blanket dot in a small clearing beside a creek. He finally admitted defeat. "We'll rest here, girl," he murmured, patting the mare's sweaty neck. She had given her all today, carrying him up these treacherous slopes. William gathered firewood, each movement sending fresh stabs through his chest. The kindling caught quickly, and soon a small flame pushed back the gathering gloom. He settled stiffly beside it, warming his hands. The snap of a twig made him freeze. His rifle lay just out of reach. Dark shapes emerged from the trees, silent as spirits. William counted 5 men, their faces painted with traditional markings. Apache warriors. They carried rifles and wore a mix of tribal and traders' clothing. An older man stepped forward, his silver hair gleaming in the firelight. He raised his empty hands. "You are the one who sheltered Little Singing Bird," he said in careful English. William blinked. "Little Singing Bird? The girl you know as Marisol." The elder's eyes were kind but watchful. "We have followed your trail since morning. You ride well for one so badly hurt." "You know Marisol?" William's voice cracked with hope. The elder nodded and gestured to his companions. They joined William at the fire, moving with the fluid grace of men at home in these mountains. "I am Gray Fox. We are her mother's people. The child carries our hopes in her heart." William accepted the offered pipe, taking a careful draw before passing it on. The ritual settled his nerves. The railroad men took her, and the foal. And some papers. Gray Fox's face grew grave. "The parchment. This is why we sought you." He spoke rapidly in Apache to his companions. One brought forward a water skin and dried meat, which William accepted gratefully. "The paper is more than a simple deed," Gray Fox continued. "It is proof of a sacred treaty signed by our chiefs and your government's men 30 summers ago. It guarantees our rights to the valley's water, not just the land, but the rivers that give life to all." William leaned forward, understanding dawning. "And if the railroad takes control, they will dam the rivers for their steam engines, divert the water from our crops. Many families will lose their homes, their way of life." The elder's eyes reflected the flames. "Marisol's grandfather was our last chief. Before death took him, he entrusted the treaty to her, knowing the railroad sought it. The foal was his final gift, a creature as brave and stubborn as she." The other men nodded solemnly. One spoke in Apache, and Gray Fox translated. "He says you showed courage, taking her in, fighting for her. We would be honored to help you find her." Warmth filled William's chest that had nothing to do with the fire. "I would be grateful. But why trust me?" Gray Fox smiled. "The Great Spirit speaks through actions, not words. You protected our Little Singing Bird when you could have turned her away. Now we will protect you." The men shared their knowledge of the terrain, drawing maps in the dirt. They knew shortcuts the railroad men would not dare take, paths that could cut days off the pursuit. One warrior, who introduced himself as Swift Deer, had scouted the riders' camp earlier that day. "They head for Silver Bluff," he reported, "but slowly. The foal fights them, and the girl too. They must rest often." William's heart swelled with pride at Marisol's resistance. But worry gnawed at him too. How long before the men lost patience with her defiance? As the night deepened, the Apache warriors taught William their signs and signals. If they became separated, they could still communicate across the ridges. They showed him how to move more quietly, even with his injuries. Their respect for the land and its ways reminded him of Marisol's gentle songs to the foal. When dawn painted the eastern sky, William stood with his new allies. His body still ached, but determination burned brighter than pain. Gray Fox gripped his arm in farewell. "We will watch over you," the elder promised. "When the time comes to confront these men, you will not stand alone." William mounted his Mari, feeling stronger despite his wounds. The Apache warriors melted into the forest like shadows, but he knew they were there. For the first time since the raid, hope stirred in his heart. He turned his horse toward the rising sun, toward Silver Bluff and Marisol. The Mari seemed to sense his renewed purpose, picking her way sure-footed down the trail. Today, they would make up lost ground. Today, they would begin to make things right. The mountain passes groaned under winter's grip as William and his Apache companions pushed forward. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, making the tracking slower but the signs clearer. William's Mare picked her way carefully through the drifts, steam rising from her flanks in the bitter air. Swift Deer rode ahead, his keen eyes scanning the ground. He pulled up suddenly, pointing to a length of frayed rope half buried in snow. "The foals. Halter," he said, lifting it for William to see. "It fought hard here." William took the broken rope, running it through his fingers. Pride and worry mingled in his chest as he imagined the young horses' struggle. Nearby, hoofprints told the story. The foal had reared and twisted, nearly breaking, free before being caught again. "Your little singing bird chose a strong spirit in that one," Gray Fox commented, riding up beside William. The elder's face was weathered against the cutting wind, but his eyes sparkled, like calls to like. They pressed on through the afternoon, the winter wind slicing across their faces like a knife. William pulled his scarf tighter, remembering warmer moments. Marisol's laughter echoing in his cabin as she taught the foal to take sugar from her palm, her voice rising sweet and clear with old Spanish hymns while she worked. The memory of those sounds made the wind's howl harder to bear. When darkness forced them to make camp, the Apache warriors showed William how to build a shelter against a rock face, blocking the worst of the wind. They shared strips of dried venison, tough but nourishing, passed around in comfortable silence. Later, as the fire burned low, Gray Fox spoke of his people's long resistance against those who would take their lands. "Each generation must fight its own battle," he said, his voice carrying despite the wind. "But we fight with hope, not hate. The land remembers those who protect it." William nodded, understanding deeper now why the parchment meant so much. It wasn't just paper and ink. It was a promise to honor the land and its people. He bowed his head in prayer, asking God to keep Marisol safe until he could reach her. The next day brought more slow progress through the passes. The Apache riders spread out, watching for ambush, but the trails were empty save for deer tracks and the occasional wolf print. William's ribs still ached, but less sharply now. His body was healing, even as his resolve hardened. That evening, Swift Deer returned from scouting with news. "Riders passed here yesterday," he reported, crouching by their small fire. "They travel slow. The girl gives them trouble." His smile showed fierce approval. William could well imagine Marisol's defiance. She would fight them every step, just like her foal. The thought both worried and heartened him. "How far to Silver Bluff now?" "2 valleys more," Gray Fox answered, pointing south. "See there, smoke on the horizon when the clouds break." True. Enough, William caught glimpses of distant smoke when the winter sky cleared briefly. Silver Bluff, the town that had seemed so simple before, just a place to buy supplies and leave quickly. Now it held everything he had left to care about. On the third day, they rode within sight of the town. From their high vantage point, William studied it through his rifle scope. The sheriff's office sat squat and solid on the main street, its jail cells backing onto an alley. That would be where they held Marisol. The railroad men have many guns in town, Swift Deer warned after returning from a closer look. They watch the streets. And the sheriff, he is their dog. William grimaced. He had seen enough of Sheriff Carver's true nature now to know that justice would not come easily. But looking at the determined faces of his Apache allies, he knew he was no longer fighting alone. Gray Fox touched his arm. We have friends among the townspeople, too. Those who remember old kindnesses, who see the railroad's greed clearly. When the time comes, they will help. William nodded, grateful for these warriors who had become brothers in this cause. His quiet life of solitude seemed far away now. God had given him a new purpose, a chance to protect what was right. He checked his rifle carefully, knowing that soon he would need it. The winter wind moaned through the passes behind them, but William barely felt its bite anymore. His focus was entirely on the town below, on the sheriff's office where Marisol waited. He would bring her home. He would make things right. Gray Fox passed him a water skin, and William drank deeply. They would need their strength for what lay ahead. The old warrior spoke softly. The Great Spirit did not make you a lonely man forever, my friend. He brought you our little singing bird to heal your heart. William looked at his companion sharply, surprised by how true those words rang. Somehow, in trying to protect Marisol, he had found his own way back to life. William tied his horse behind Widow Chun's laundry, where steam and sheets provided good cover. He pulled his coat collar high and moved on to Silver Bluff's main street, keeping his head down. His boots crunched on patches of dirty snow as he worked his way through the busy afternoon crowd outside the Golden Nugget Saloon. 3 railroad men lounged against the hitching post, their expensive boots crossed at the ankles. Their revolvers hung low, ready for trouble. They watched the street like wolves eyeing sheep, confident in their power. William's jaw tightened as he recognized 2 of them from the raid on his cabin. Sheriff Carver emerged from his office, tipping his hat to the railroad men with an eager smile that made William's stomach turn. The badge on Carver's chest caught the winter sunlight, a mockery of the law it was meant to represent. William watched as the sheriff accepted a cigar, laughing at some private joke. The man's belly shook beneath his vest, well fed on railroad. Bribes. Much obliged, boys, Carver said loud enough for William to hear as he passed. Don't you worry none about that girl. She ain't going nowhere till the judge comes next week. We'll sort this theft business proper and legal-like. William's hands clenched in his pockets. Theft indeed, when it was the railroad stealing land and lives. He forced himself to keep walking, remembering Gray Fox's counsel about patience. Near Palmer's livery, William spotted the foal in a small pen. The young horse paced nervously, its ribs showing through its winter coat. 2 armed men sat on crates nearby, playing cards but keeping watch. One wore railroad company clothes, the other a deputy's badge. Hey, mister, you wanting to stable a horse? The livery boy called out. William shook his head and moved on, but not before noting how the foal's head had come up at the sound of voices, searching. It was looking for Marisol, he knew. The thought of them separated made his chest ache. He found Mrs. Baker at her boarding house kitchen door, where she took in washing. She had always been kind to him on supply runs, and her eyes now held sympathy. As she whispered news while hanging sheets, "They've got the poor child in the jail cell out back," she murmured, pinning up a pillowcase. "Sheriff claims she stole that foal and some important papers, but everyone knows it's railroad business. Really, they bring her food twice a day, such as it is. She sings sometimes in Spanish. Breaks my heart to hear it." William nodded his thanks, pressing a coin into her work-roughened hand. "Much obliged, ma'am." As dusk approached, he made his way through the shadowy alleys behind the buildings. The jail cells were built into the rear of the sheriff's office, Small barred windows set high in the brick wall. A deputy made rounds every hour, lazy and predictable. William counted 4 railroad men, who took turns watching the street in front of the office. They changed guard at sunset and midnight, he noticed. 2 more usually lounged at the saloon, ready to provide backup. Not impossible odds with his Apache allies, but it would require careful timing. Speaking of allies, he caught glimpses of. Then now, swift deer moving like a shadow past the livery. Gray Fox speaking quietly with the blacksmith, who had no love for the railroad. They were positioning themselves to block reinforcements when the time came, melting into the spaces between buildings where townfolk rarely looked. William found a spot behind stacked crates, where he could watch the jail unseen. The last light faded from the sky, and lamps began to glow in windows. From the high barred window, he heard soft singing, a Spanish lullaby he recognized from evenings in his cabin. Marisol's voice was clear despite her imprisonment, carrying hope like a lantern in the darkness. He bowed his head, lips moving in silent prayer. Lord, guide my hand in what's to come. Protect that child as you've protected me. Help us make this right. The evening crowds thinned as working folk headed home to their suppers. William watched Carver lock up his office for the night, leaving 2 deputies to watch the jail. The sheriff strutted toward the saloon, probably to report to his railroad masters. A cat slunk past William's hiding place, pausing to study him with gleaming eyes before moving on. Somewhere in the darkness, he knew his Apache brothers were also waiting, watching, preparing. The pieces were falling into place. William touched the Bible in his coat pocket, drawing strength from its familiar presence. The time for action was coming soon. He could feel it in his bones, like the way he used to sense storms rolling in across the high country. But this storm would be of their own making, and with God's help, it would wash Silver Bluff clean. The moon hung low over Silver Bluff as William crouched in the alley behind the sheriff's office. His rifle felt solid in his hands, a familiar weight. He had positioned his Apache eyes around the town, some watching the railroad boarding house, others near the livery where they had already freed the foal. Gray Fox had slipped him the recovered parchment just minutes ago, taken from a dozing guard. The eastern sky began to pale. William checked his pocket watch in the dim light. 4:30 in the morning. The drowsiest hour, when even the most vigilant guards fought heavy eyelids. He could hear the deputy inside shuffling papers, probably struggling to stay awake himself. William rose slowly, muscles tight from the cold. He whispered a quick prayer, then moved. His boots made no sound on the wooden sidewalk as he approached the office door. The hinges creaked softly as he pushed it open. Deputy Pete Wilson's head snapped up from his desk, eyes widening. His hand jerked toward his holster, but William's rifle barrel was already steady. "Don't," William said quietly. "Just sit easy." The deputy's face went pale. His fingers twitched away from his gun. "Mr. Hawley, you can't. I can and I will." William's voice was steel. "Where's the key to the cells?" Aye. Pete fumbled in his desk drawer, nearly knocking over an oil lamp in his panic. "Careful with that light," William warned. "Now unlock the cell. No sudden moves." The deputy's hand shook as he lifted a ring of keys. William followed him to the cells in back, rifle trained steady. In the dim lamplight, he saw Marisol curled on her thin mattress. She sat up at their approach, hope blazing in her eyes. "William," she whispered, before Pete could get the key in the lock. Boots thundered on the front porch. Sheriff Carver burst in, hand on his gun. "Wilson, what's all this racket about?" He froze at the sight of William's rifle. His face purpled. "Holly, you gone plumb crazy?" "Put that weapon down." "No, sir, I will not." William's aim never wavered. "This ends now, Sheriff. That girl is innocent, and you know it. She's a thief." Stole railroad property. William pulled the parchment from his coat with his free hand and slapped it onto the desk. This here's the only stolen property. Treaty rights to that valley, signed and sealed proper. The railroad's trying to bury, and using you to do their dirty work. The sheriff's expression flickered. Outside, voices grew louder as townsfolk began gathering, drawn by the commotion. William heard the preacher's distinctive voice among them. "Tom, what's happening in there?" Preacher Wells called through the door. "Come in, preacher," William answered. "Reckon we need a man of God to witness this." The door creaked open. Amos Wells entered slowly, Bible tucked under his arm. His white beard caught the lamplight as he took in the scene. "William Holly, I trust you have good reason for this?" "Read it, preacher." William nodded to the parchment. "Read it out loud so everyone can hear the truth." More townspeople pressed in behind the preacher as he picked up the document. Sheriff Carver shifted uneasily, but William's rifle kept him still. The deputy hunched in his chair, looking miserable. Preacher Wells cleared his throat and began to read in his strong pulpit voice. "This treaty, being a legal and binding agreement between the United States government and the Apache peoples, does hereby guarantee in perpetuity the water and grazing rights to the valley known as Agua Dulce." The crowd murmured as he continued, detailing the legitimate claims that the railroad had tried to erase. William watched understanding dawn on their faces. Even the sheriff's bluster began to fade as voice. The truth emerged in the preacher's steady recitation. Through the window, William spotted railroad men approaching, guns ready. But they pulled up short at the sight of the crowd. Their leader, a hard-faced man in a fine coat, assessed the situation with cold eyes. William saw him register the angry faces of the townsfolk, the preacher's authoritative presence, the damning evidence being read aloud. The man's jaw clenched. With a sharp gesture, he ordered his men to stand down. It seems, Preacher Wells concluded, that a grave injustice was nearly done here. "Sheriff Carver, I believe you have an innocent child locked up." The sheriff's shoulders sagged. He nodded to the deputy, who finally unlocked Marisol's cell with trembling fingers. The door swung open with a metallic groan. Marisol flew out like a bird released, straight into William's waiting arm. He kept his rifle steady with the other, but his heart swelled as she pressed her face into his coat. "I knew you'd come," she whispered in Spanish. "I knew God would send you." William felt moisture in his eyes as he held her close. The townspeople watched in silence, shame and sympathy mingling on their faces. Outside, the railroad men mounted up and rode away, unwilling to face the tide of public opinion turning against them. The sun's first rays streamed through the window, painting the office in gold. Justice, delayed but not denied, had finally arrived in Silver Bluff with the dawn. The morning sun warmed their backs as William led the way home, the foal trotting close behind Marisol's horse. Though the young animal was shaken from its ordeal, gentle words and steady handling had calmed its nerves. The Apache riders flanked them protectively through the mountain passes, their presence a reminder that neither William nor Marisol would face darkness alone again. "Thank you," Marisol said softly as they climbed the familiar trail to the cabin. "Not just for saving me and the foal. For everything." She paused, gathering courage. "My mother died when I was small. I used to pray every night for God to send me a father who would care like she did." Her voice trembled. "He sent you." William's throat tightened. He reached across to squeeze her hand, unable to speak past the emotion filling his chest. The old wound of losing his own daughter had begun to heal. Transformed by this child's trust and love dotted the cabin, they found the door hanging crooked and windows broken. But where William once would have faced repairs alone, now helpers appeared. Neighbors rode up, leading pack horses loaded with lumber, nails, and food. Shame colored their faces as they offered to rebuild Raid had destroyed. "We should have spoken up sooner," Tom Baker said, handing William a sack of flour. "Making it right starts today." Day by day, the cabin returned to life. Fresh-cut boards replaced splintered ones. New glass sparkled in the windows. Women from town brought quilts and cooking pots. The Apache OIs helped mend fences and stocked the barn with winter hay dot in the evenings. Lamplight glowed through clean window panes. William's deep voice read from his Bible, while Marisol hummed the old songs her grandfather had taught her. The familiar Spanish melodies twined with ancient scripture, creating something new and beautiful outside in the autumn pasture. The foal grew stronger. Its coat gleamed with health as it raced through golden grass, kicking up joy. William watched from the porch, Marisol's head resting against his shoulder. His heart swelled with gratitude. God had not just restored what was broken. He had built something far richer than before. The cabin that had once echoed with loneliness now rang with hope. Every nail driven, every meal shared, every evening prayer was another thread binding this unlikely family together in faith and love. As winter's icy grip began to loosen, patches of grass emerged from beneath the melting snow. The Sunday morning dawned clear and mild, perfect for the ride into town. William adjusted Marisol's shawl before they mounted up, the foal following behind them like a faithful shadow, its coat now glossy and well-fed. The little church stood bright against the blue sky, its white clapboards freshly painted. As William and Marisol entered, boots echoing on wooden floors, the congregation turned to watch. Some smiled warmly, others nodded in greeting. William guided Marisol to their usual pew, and together they bowed their heads in prayer. Preacher Wells stood at his pulpit, his weathered Bible open before him. His gentle voice carried through the quiet sanctuary as he spoke of God's mysterious ways. "The Lord often hides his greatest mercies in the weakest vessels," he said, his eyes twinkling. A frightened foal, a lost child, these become his instruments of healing and hope. After the final hymn, several townsfolk approached to shake Marisol's hand. Mrs. Baker invited her to Sunday dinner next week, while Tom offered William help with spring planting. That evening, as lamplight filled their cozy cabin, William bowed his head over their simple supper. "Lord," he prayed, voice rough with emotion, "thank you for giving me family again." The foal dozed near the hearth, its head resting in Marisol's lap as she stroked its forelock. William smiled, his heart full. The lonely days were behind him now. In their place stood this precious gift, a daughter to love and a purpose to guide them forward. If this story made you pause, reflect, or even smile, don't forget to subscribe. I post daily, and the next story might be exactly what you need to hear.